the counterfeiter or the central bank or the banking system uh, creates money, it creates bubbles, and those bubbles are it's like you and me could be part of the bubble also because we we part of the activities which are supported by printing presses, and as long as money supply growth continues, and then this could last for quite a while, uh, everybody is happy and satisfied. And so various activities like NVIDIA and various other high-tech technology and whatever, right? They're actually bubbles, but they're not aware that they're bubbles. They think they're actually good. After the announcement of the Nvidia earnings results, they turned bullish. You know, they said the market is great, fundamentals are good, everything is hunky dory.
Mm.
The point is that most commentators, most economists from both schools, even some of the Austrians, they're looking at the economy in terms of strengths. Like they're assessing things in terms of how strong the indicator here is. If, for instance, employment is above expectation, they say economy is doing well, right? And if company makes great profits, everything is great. But that's not the way uh, one should look at it, because the problem, as it was articulated by Ludwig von Mises and Mare Rosbach, that's the two one that I believe one needs to look at, and nobody else. And in particular, Mare Rosbach, they looked at the thing from a perspective of how distorted the situation is. In other words, first of all, when people yesterday were talking about bubble, right? People talking about bubbles, but nobody defined what bubble means. What is it, right? When they talk about bubble, they say NVIDIA is not a bubble, but something else is a bubble. So if we provide proper definition for bubble, bubble basically is related to something monetary, something that related to the printing money, right?
Mm.
Or monetary policy of the central bank. And so bubble is associated with creation of money out of thin air. That's the term I'm using in line with Mare Rosbach also. And so what does it mean when you print money? When you print money, you basically create money. You're setting in motion what we call the exchange of nothing for something. Why? Because first of all, money is the medium of exchange. You're using money to exchange goods for goods, right? Not something for something. It's just a middleman, nothing else. But the moment you print money, it's like a counterfeiter. You're basically setting the option for the counterfeiter to take goods without contributing anything, right? Which means nothing for something. The moment you set in motion nothing for something, the second question is should be asked, what does it mean exactly? So it's stealing from wealth producers, resources, and providing this to counterfeiter or anybody who holds this new money, right? And who holds this new money? Various bubble activities, various activities that emerged on the back of the increase in money supply. In other words, if you look at the counterfeiter, what it did, printed money, and then they're using the money and goes to the shop and buys things, right? Now, various products that he supports, sponsors, are basically becoming a bubble, because if he wouldn't be buying, they probably wouldn't be reacting. You know, there wouldn't be any effect, right? So, which means the increase in activities on the back of the increases in money supply and easy monetary policy means reduction in interest rate, which we'll discuss in a second, sets in motion whereas the emergence of bubble activities. That's what bubble activities are. False activities, which wouldn't be there if not for money creation. They wouldn't be there if not for the counterfeiter money.
Let's pause 1 second, Frank. So pull us back out for our subscribers so that they understand that what you're talking about is a fiat currency system that's driven largely by central banking, which tells us what a dollar's worth, versus the old way, which there was some kind of a metal standard, whether it's gold or silver, let's start people back there just so they can see, have a better contrast of where historically we've been for thousands of years, and now we're now in the last, say, 100 or so years with
Very
some
good. Very
exceptions.
good
Yeah, why don't
question.
we do that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, like what's the purpose of money at all? Why do we have money? Well, barter cannot support proper activities. In other words, if I'm a butcher, let's say, and I would like to exchange my meat for strawberries, the strawberry farmer says he's a vegetarian, he doesn't like meat, right? So we got a problem, right? There couldn't be a so-called exchange. So therefore, in order to resolve the issue, it took many hundreds of thousands of years until human beings found a solution that instead of having barter system or direct exchange, we're probably required to find some commodity which is very marketable. Everybody will accept it and it doesn't mind. So people eventually, after many years, after trying various things, they have settled on gold as money, right?
And
As the
what
but
you're describing though with the strawberries and the meat, that's the double coincidence of wants, correct?
That's right. That's right. In other words, so-called direct exchange, barter, right? The barter was inefficient. You couldn't really do things or develop things. But in other words, if somebody specializes, he would have problems because he specialized in producing meat, but very few people really want meat, let's say, or something else, let's say. So once they have found or established another things like a commodity or a thing that you could exchange for it, now the meat could be exchanged for something, let's call it X, or let's call it gold. Let's say people have discovered after many years that gold is acceptable commodity. So the butcher would accept his meat for gold, and then the strawberry farmer or farmer wouldn't mind to exchange his product. He will accept the first of all gold, right? So because he knows that he can use gold for whatever things he wants, right? To exchange it. So in other words, money, and that's what Mises called money. Money is the most marketable commodity which fulfills the role of the medium of exchange. Why it's the most marketable? Because people found it acceptable, like it, and why they have settled on gold? Because gold is durable. You can splice it into tiny stuff, and it's portable, and it's not non-destructible, right? And that's a very important thing. And so, apart from being useful for jewelry and other things, the people discovered or realized that it can be used for as a medium of exchange, as a middleman, and that's how they started. So when you have a system which is based on gold, let's say, if I got something, I can go and exchange it. If I got gold, I can go and exchange it for something I really want, right? And we can pass the goal to somebody else, and everybody is satisfied. In other words, you're paying with something which is accepted by everybody. Everybody is ready to exchange his stuff for gold because he knows they can use gold to exchange for something else, right? In other words, with the help of gold, you can exchange, or with the help of proper money, you can exchange something for something. Not what you exchange something you have for gold, and then you exchange gold for something that you really want, right? Which means something for something. But the moment we introduce a system which is not based on gold, but let's say some kind of a fraudulent system. Let's say that historically speaking, people didn't want to carry gold in their pockets. It's too dangerous, too risky. So they were placing gold with banks, storing with the banks, and banks would give them a certificate. And this certificate was written there. This particular guy, his name, whatever, he placed 10 ounces of gold with my bank, right? And he entitled to take the gold anytime he wants. So now people started to trade with those certificates.
In other words, his money's a receipt.
But money is like a receipt, right? In this sense. So therefore, people were trading with those receipts, and those receipts were seen as money. So as long as the receipts were fully covered by gold. Nothing wrong with it, right? But banks discovered that why not to cheat? That's really how it works. People, when they sit on such amount of possibilities, there was a temptation to cheat, to commit a fraud. So some banks started to issue more receipts than gold. We had gold, so we had all of a sudden receipts unbacked by gold were floating around. And because many banks were issuing receipts because people were storing the gold with various buy. So in a free market, what would happen that the receipts that of the banks that overissued the too many receipts, the purchasing power of those receipts would start declining, right? Because there were too many of them. So what would happen? People holders of the receipts would say, "Hey, I deposited gold, and now all of a sudden the value of my gold is the base now. No, I'd rather go and try and take it out." So people would approach this bank that overissued those receipts, right? And they would demand the gold back, right? So now, if many of them would approach the bank would go under, right? Would be bankrupt. So instead of relying a bankruptcy of those banks, the government said, no, 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 we issue a decree that tells you or that stipulates that banks don't need to redeem the tickets or receipts for gold. You don't have to redeem as a bank. So the banks realized, well, hi, we got now massive opportunity. Now we can issue tickets as many tickets as we like, right? And this would create massive hyperinflation, right? Because
So just as an example, as we're recording today on November 20th, and this is for people that are listening, this is I'm holding up a pure troy ounce of silver, and this is a US coin. Quickly, when I went to a bank, if I'm understanding what you're saying, I take this to a bank, they're going to give me $1. And if I had a $1 bill and I go to a bank, they're going to give me 1 ounce of silver. Today, to get one of these, I need 51 receipts. I need 50.
no, yeah. You see, Marco, what I wanted to give you some background as to what happened to the medium of exchange. So the point now that the government can can the issue a decree that banks don't need to redeem the tickets for gold, right? The moment they do this, they're running a risk of that every bank will say, "Well, that's a great opportunity. I'll start issuing a lot of tickets," right? So, that's in order to control the supply of tickets, the government introduces an organization. We call it central bank, a monopoly, and says you'll be in charge of managing the certificates of various banks, right? And you can also issue your own certificate, which will be linked to the various banks at a ratio, right? And that's really how we started the whole fiat system, right? Paper system with central banking, right? And but the central bank was established on a foundation of fraud already because the banks didn't have to redeem the certificates for gold, right? So it's been already based on a fraudulent system. So in order to maintain the fraud, the central bank is now obliged on a daily basis to print money all the time to manage money. Why? Because because if for instance two overissuing as a particular bank overissues too many tickets, right? At the end of the day, he has to clear those tickets with somebody else. There's a clearing of checks, let's say, right? And so bank every bank will present to another bank its checks, right? And if a particular bank doesn't have enough money to support those checks, it will be declared bankrupt also. So the central bank's role in this fraudulent system is to print enough money that banks will not bankrupt each other. That's all. That's the reason why central bank conducts open market operations on a daily basis. Nobody talks about it. Every day, they're buying and selling assets. So this could be discussion for something for another discussion. But I just wanted to again to elaborate the whole issue that we right now don't have a system, monetary system, which is backed by gold, but it's backed by nothing, right? And when it's backed by nothing, it's basically like a fraud. The whole system is not so is supported by it's not supported. The base is fraudulent because it's been established in order to protect the fraud, right? In order to justify or allow the banks not to redeem the certificates for gold. That's all.
Mm.
So at present we have a situation where a central bank can manage the money supply, manages, which means, but let's say the central bank can tell the banks to keep certain amount of money or central bank money or whatever you want to call it as reserves against deposits, right? So I don't want to go now to the whole system of banking system here. It's just discussion and so on. In order to make things simple, as far as boom bust cycles are concerned, what happens is you can look at the money that that the central bank generates in conjunction with banks. Banks are a major contributor to creation of money. We have a situation where money are printed in a managed way, and that's basically the managed printing as such. Right? Sets in motion what we call the fraudulent money, counterfeit money, creates the bubbles, if you want, right? So now
So I was going to say, so you've given us a really good grounding on a authentic definition of money.
it's just a little bit, but you
Yeah.
need more. It requires a
Yeah, no, and well, believe me, we're gonna link to a lot of, like I make sure everybody tries to read Human Action and other things, but
it's a complicated book for ordinary people.
I made the mistake. They told me don't start with that one, and I went right at it. But I would tell people don't start there. Maybe Rothbard's America's Great Depression or something. But anyway,
Yeah,
so
look,
now,
they're all great, but the
yeah, they're
point
all
is
great.
that you need a certain philosophical foundation, etc. So
Yeah.
for the first lecture, it's very hard, you know.
So you want to take us through the boom bust? Maybe
Okay,
should we start by defining what actually is a price?
price if so for anything, right? It's a rate of exchange of something for something else. That's really a price, but the point for as far as boom bust cycles is concerned, requires something a little bit something else. In other words, we just started to discuss the counterfeit money and then the fraud. So now, when a counterfeiter prints money, that's simple, right? And he uses the fraudulent money to take to grab goods and services from all those guys who produced something, right? But he produced absolutely nothing. Now that we have an exchange of nothing for something. Now it comes with empty tickets, which doesn't is not backed up by anything, and buys goods. So somebody produced those goods and he gives him in return empty ticket. But because because we live in a complex environment, people don't not aware of this, right? Only over time they're starting to realize that prices are starting to go up, whatever. But inflation is not increasing prices. Symptoms of inflation could be increases in prices, right? But anyhow, so once once the counterfeiter or the central bank or the banking system creates money, it creates bubbles, and those bubbles are it's like you and me could be part of the bubble also, because we part of the activities which are supported by printing presses, and as long as money supply growth continues, and this could last for quite a while, everybody is happy and satisfied. And so various activities like NVIDIA and various other high-tech technology and whatever, right? They're actually bubbles, but they're not aware that they're bubbles. They think they're actually good. Why? Because the way the analysts looking at things, they look at things in terms of strengths of the so-called economic activity or economic indicators. So if economic indicators are strong, they say, well, everything is hunky dory. But in other words, they don't really look at the fact that the strengths occurred here on account of printing presses, on account of counterfeiters, right? In other words, the environment that was created, it's like you're sitting on a volcano, right? And on this volcano, on this massive bubble, let's say, you got a lot of activities which appear to be quite good and quite genuine and quite healthy. But the moment the printing press is reversing, because at some stage the central bank comes to the conclusion that he basically is scared that prices are starting to go higher, let's say, right? And he says, well, I need to reverse this. And the moment they're doing this, the oxygen that supported these bubbles starting to evaporate, and the bubble is starting to comes under pressure. And various activities which are sitting on this bubble have to fall, right? They have to fall, right? It doesn't matter whether you're in NVIDIA, AI, all sorts of things. It's irrelevant, right? It's all beside the point. They will have to fall, right? How long it may take for them to fall, it's another story. Now, that's the Austrian economics cannot give you the timing, but what the Austrian economics can tell you that the economic bust is in response to the economic boom, which was created by the central bank, nothing else, right? Central banks are the causes of the boom bust cycles. And so the question now is for how long? As we said, we don't know, but we can provide some guesstimates. First of all, in order to maintain activities, people require consumer goods. They have to eat. They have to stay alive, right? I believe that you're following Ayn Rand also, right? Rand.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
To me, it was one of the greatest economists, Ayn Rand, although officially she is not. So basically, there's something called, or we call it the few good Austrian economists like Baumbarwerk, if you heard his name.
Yeah. Eugen von Bauwerk.
Yeah, there were also von Striegel and also Mare Rosbach. They were talking about a subsistent fund. In other words, you have to have a subsistent fund, now the fund of consumer goods in order to stay alive. Now, you cannot start to produce whilst you don't have the means of support, means of supporting you, so subsistence. And so in other words, printing money, what it does, it destroys the subsistence fund. It destroys your ability to produce. It basically motivates consumption, which is not supported by anything. In fact, the mainstream economics is based on demand creates supply, which is utter nonsense, right? Demand does not create supply, but in reverse, you have to produce first before it can consume. The mainstream economics says, well, if you boost the demand, consumption, the rest will follow suit. It's not. Right? So the point is that that you have to have enough consumer goods, ability to produce consumer goods, in order to keep the economy going. In order to have this ability, you have to have what we call capital goods, right? Infrastructure. And infrastructure cannot emerge just out of the blue. Somebody has to build the tools, machinery, etc.
Mm.
Those people that are engaged in building tools and machinery must be fed. You have to give them something to eat, right? Otherwise, they'll die of starvation. They won't be able to produce anything, right?
I always point people to I Pencil by Leonard Reed to basically understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Pencil is also great. I mean, but I'm just saying that what is required always is the tools and machinery to create economic growth. But tools and machinery cannot emerge out of the blue. Somebody has to produce them, and
Right.
those somebody are individuals that must be supported, must be fed, yeah, must be given a decent living, if you want, right?
So you wrote recently too on your Substack that you can't even have innovation unless you have an economy that's based on savings and capital.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Okay. Now, so first of all, when those three guys who got the Nobel Prize for discovering inverted commas innovation as an important factor, Mises wrote about it 1,000 years ago and was saying that innovation cannot cause economic growth by itself. you have to have capital, right? You have to have tools and machinery. In order to have tools and machinery, you have to have savings. Somebody, like if you're producing 10 apples and you're consuming two, the saving is 8 apples. Now, those 8 apples can be used to fund somebody, or to fund a butcher, a baker, or whoever, right? Now, what you have to look at the things as they are, not in a complicated way as the mainstream does. And so saving is something real. Saved consumer goods, nothing is going to happen, right? Because at the end of the day, people, we want to have good life. Good life means we need to have good food. We have to have cars, all sort of things, but we need to feed ourselves. If we cannot feed ourselves, it's all useless. And so the point of discussing, let's say, subsistence fund, that's what it's all about. So you can have ideas, let's say, and if Robinson Crusoe, let's say, can be visualized, or you can say that he's an intelligent guy. He's an engineer by profession. He knows exactly how to do things, but he doesn't have the means. He got only his own hands. That's all, and he got things in nature. So in order to stay alive, he discovered an apple tree, and he said, "That's great." So now, if he started to pick up eight. He manages to pick up 8 apples a day, and that's really just enough for him to stay alive. But then he realizes that if he would have a particular stick, this particular stick, special stick, would allow him to collect maybe 20 apples a day. But he
Mhm.
doesn't have the stick. In order to make the stick, he would have to allocate his time for making the stick. And then he would die of starvation because he won't have enough apples. So what he has to do is every day when he manages to, by hand, to pick up 8 apples, to put aside apple or two until he'll have enough apples that will allow him to concentrate now on building the sticks. That's really how important savings are. Savings of consumer goods. And that's the subsistence fund. So now if you look at the system as a whole, subsistence fund, it could be everybody, well, everybody that produces things contributes to subsistence fund. If he is not a counterfeiter. But because there are so many counterfeiters, because of the printing presses, because they're coming with empty tickets, they're basically virtually stealing from the subsistence fund, stealing, and denying those people that that actually that have contributed to the subsistence fund, denying denying them,
Uh-huh.
and they cannot produce things.
Do you think so basically what ends up happening is that the price signals get distorted in such a way that when I make a value judgment on buying a stock or buying a home in, the year 2000 or something like that, I'm sorry, like a .com stock or like a house in like 2005 or whatever, I'm operating on distorted price signals, and then what Mises would call a malinvestment. I make a bad investment off of the wrong. In other words, I have the wrong orientation when I make a decision to buy something or purchase something, and I think the value's higher than it actually is in reality.
Yeah, look, the whole issue of malinvestment and misallocation of resources can be put in a simple way. In other words, let's start with interest rates. When central bank lowers interest rates, right? Everybody is delighted. In particular, Donald Trump says, "Yeah, we need to have a low interest rate." But interest rates is basically it's a signal. It's a doesn't cause anything, just a reflection of how much individuals would like, how much they would like to consume today versus tomorrow. So let's say that's what we call time preference. In other words, if people, if individuals would like, you can, or I can start even in a more simplistic way. If you take a completely poor individual who got nothing in his possession, and you ask him, would you got little bit of resources just to stay alive. If you ask this individual to commit some of his resources for lending or investment, he will say, no, go to hell, I can't do it, right? I can't invest and can't lend anything, right? I just barely can stay alive. So therefore, his time preference is unlimited. He basically only wants to live at present. He cannot live in the future at all, cannot plan anything. Now, the moment it will start, he will become a little bit wealthier. He can start considering lending, investing. In other words, his time preference will start to go down, and this will be reflected in what we call interest rate. The market interest rate will go in a proper free market. That's what the interest rate will signal to everybody, that now people, the rates have gone down because people, nobody will say they became wealthy or whatever, but now they're ready to let, ready to invest. And because at the moment somebody says, I want to invest for the future, means that sometimes in the future they will be ready to produce consumer goods in the future. But in order to produce consumer goods in the future, we have to have the tools and machinery, right? You have to produce them. And to produce them, you have to provide food and support to various individuals that making those tools and machinery, right? So therefore, what it means that when interest rates are going down, people have decided this way, and therefore they have allocated resources, which means savings and all the necessary things to build the infrastructure. But the moment central bank comes and lowers interest rate, regardless of whether people do save or not, we have a problem, because as a businessman, you're starting basically, you're reacting to interest rates. So what do? The moment the low interest has been lowered, you go and build various capital projects. Because if you can make a calculation in terms of project evaluation, you say, well, under these conditions, it's worth my while to invest in various capital projects. But the moment you're starting to do it, you have a problem, because no savings were allocated. Nobody allocated savings for that, right? People haven't made this decision. So what will happen then? That the capital projects that you're undertaking now, that it will steal resources from something which produces something useful, right? Something good, wealth creating. And that's why we call it misallocation of resources. It steals resources from something good towards something which is false, right? Which shouldn't happen, right? And therefore, once the central bank reverses its interest rate policy, the
Mhm.
whole thing will crumble, right?
And that's why we have, like, the dot-com bust and the housing bust and
Exactly. So in other words, you cannot falsify going against the market wishes, the wishes of people.
well, you say I remember when I was first learning Austrian economics, somebody was mentoring me and was saying that, Austrian economics can tell you what, and it can tell you why, and it can tell you where, but it will never tell you when. You have to look for signals and be prepared. But as you were saying earlier about the timing, but one of the things that Rothbard talks about is, like, you can start to see these clusters of errors. Like, all of a sudden, it's not just that one housing person went down. It was like a cluster of them, a bunch of these
Exactly,
business. Yeah. Tell us about
because
the cluster of errors.
they all sit on the earthquake, on this massive, gigantic bubble, and then they may have a great appearance. They may the company may be run efficiently. They have a efficient inventory control. Everything looks perfect, right? The managing director of smart people, everything. But
Mhm.
they basically were seduced, as Morozbat said, because of the low interest rate, to enter the sector, which normally they wouldn't have happened. They were conned. They
So, Punch, I mean, this is what we talk about all the time. I mean, this is when your orientation is disconnected from reality, it's going to have a negative effect on how you make sense of your reality, have a negative effect on how you decide, act, and learn.
Yeah. So basically, you cannot come and say, well, which sector is overvalued, undervalued. That's what most guys are doing. That's
Mhm.
waste of time. All you know that the bubble was created. That's what the Austrians will tell you. When the bubble will burst, we'll have to watch the central bank policies. And the most important thing is to look at the state of the subsisting fund. To evaluate this state, it must be qualitative analysis. You can't quantitatively to say how much consumer goods or or how big a subsistence fund is. But we can tell that we can tell who are or the factors that undermining the subsistence fund. There are two factors: the size of the government and the monetary policy of the central bank or printing presses. That's all. So once you observe that money supply is running high, you know that this destroys the subsistence fund. If you observe that government spend outlays are going sky high, you know this is going to destroys the subsistence fund. So you know that, and therefore, if you qualitatively reach the conclusion that the subsistence fund is in trouble, stagnating, because usually it tends to grow. But let's say it's not growing any longer. It's stagnant. God forbid it's declining. You know, you're in a serious trouble. You know that we are heading for a serious recession or maybe depression, right? And so again, this is hinges on the state of the subsistence fund. So that's why the Rosbalian, for instance, or Misesian, they don't really look at so many indicators like all the other guys. They're looking at heaps of indicators and they're reaching some idiotic conclusions, no conclusions at all, right? Stupid conclusions. Because like if you listen to the Jerome Powell, so each time he says, well, we cannot decide about the next interest rate policy until we'll have enough indicators. This is all useless talk, right? Who cares about so many indicators? All you have to assess is what's the state of the bottom line. And if you reckon that the bottom line is in trouble, the next step is how do you fix this bottom line? So Mises said to fix the bottom line, do nothing. The government should step out because the less government does, the better it's for the wealth creation, right? The less central bank prints, the better it's for the wealth creation, because the central bank, it basically what it does, it prints money, which means stealing. It's like counterfeiter, steals wealth from wealth producers. Government, what it does, useless activities, it has to fund them. Where it takes the funding from the wealth generation, private sector. So the private sector is under pressure. So the moment you're pressurizing the private sector, you're basically killing the economy because government cannot create wealth.
Now, more often than not, when there is a bust, the government is going to double down or triple down. They're not going to get out of the way. They're going to, it's like if we hear oftentimes the analogy of waking up with a hangover. You got to let the hangover pass and drink water. You don't start drinking again. But
Yeah, yeah.
the government policy is really to let's get drinking again.
Yeah, the government basically wants to support the bubbles, in other words, because economic bust is not about wealth destruction. It's about the bubble destruction, because economic bust destroys various parasitic activities, various bubbles. And the reason why the bubbles, again, we said they emerge on the back of printing presses, on the back of the empty money, unbacked money, and also the bubble activities cannot support themselves truly. They're not really profitable. Wouldn't be around. So the profits that they like Nvidia produces, whatever, it's all false. Not false in what respect? It's in terms of money, in terms of money, that monetary terms, right? The as far as proper allocation of resources concerned, they are misallocated part of the bubble, and therefore they will have to go like when once the bubble bursts completely, they will disappear. And obviously, something the AI will not disappear. Something that it will come in a different form or whatever. All this will be fine. But the point is that many so-called great activities that people are mesmerized and they're saying, well, great management, great inventory control, whatever, it's all bullshit, right?
Yeah.
The point is, if they sit on the volcano and volcano is going to burst, they will sink with the volcano.
Well, this is also the thing that the Austrians talk a lot about, is that you can't centrally plan the economy. The economy is too complex and markets are too complex. You can't have
Absolutely.
a group of bankers or a group of politicians or even both at the same time with monetary policy and fiscal policy. They can't plan for everybody. It's impossible.
No, you already you also have here an American economy, every economy that has the central bank. It's basically semi-socialism because what does central bankers are doing? They they try to guide the economy along a particular path. The saying it has to follow this particular path. Then they decide what's the right rate of growth should be, and they try to tell you how the economy is performing. And they created all those indicators like GDP, industrial production, all those things. All this is all those indicators are false. You cannot measure. You cannot say anything, right? But in terms of quantities, but they creating have created the illusion runs for many decades, and we got accustomed to this. We believe that the economy is some kind of a satellite or some spaceship which follows a particular trajectory. And then a smart guy at the central bank, at the Fed, decides whether the satellite is on the right trajectory or not. If it's not, they'll give it a push, right? Either up or either down. And how the push is done? By means of printing money, but by means of interest rates.
So it sounds what you're describing, it sounds like what Hayek called the fatal conceit. Our who Ponch and I work and develop through our work, John Boyd actually did read Hayek and he did read The Fatal Conceit. But what you're talking about is that these central planners, be they politicians or bankers, they think that they have the ability to control the economy through looking at spreadsheets or dashboards or whatever for everybody. And that's the fatal conceit, because we know in complexity, knowledge is tacit and dispersed, and everything is bottom up, not the opposite. You can't plan an economy from the top down because you don't have the ability to price, you don't have the ability to subjectively value things, and you end up making malinvestments and things like that.
Well, you see, we got a great example in our former Soviet Union collapsed, right? All the communist countries collapsing, right? Everywhere been socialism, which where was introduced, it's a disaster.
Well,
It's
it's
not
pertinent. Tell us where
there's no replacement.
tell us where you I mean, that's pertinent to the discussion, your own experience. Tell us where you grew up and how that all
Well,
what it was.
I'm basically well, I was born in Latvia, which was part of the Soviet Union a long time ago. But then my family migrated to Israel. And from there, we moved to Australia. So I lived in Australia a long time, great country, but unfortunately also practicing socialism. Most countries in the world today, there's no free market, laissez-faire capitalism. The last time there was something similar to proper capitalism it was United States in the 19th century. So if you read Ayn Rand, she's talking about capitalism, and she's saying, well, that capitalists are basically people, or the system was totally condemned today by all the socialists, and then nobody defends capitalism any longer. It's becoming a bad word, but without capitalism, we wouldn't have industrial revolution. We wouldn't have all the goodies that we have right now, all the technological know-how. Even the guys who got the Nobel Prize mentioned in the importance of enlightenment, right? But the point is, again, you have to have capitalism, which protects individuals' rights and property rights, of course. Without this, you can't have anything. But having said all that, you have to have the ability to build the infrastructure and all these things and produce all the goods that we require. So America was the only country which was close to the free market, right? And right now, the governments and the central banks or the Fed are busy destroying the whole the great system America was. And so and given that socialism is encroaching in America, I don't know how long America will be America. It will be just another socialistic state.
I want to bring Ponch in here because we talk all the time about how systems drive behaviors.
Yeah, this is great. So thanks for these insights. And I was thinking about my children, when I have these conversations, they come back and start talking about what they're hearing at school, that it's not fair that billionaires are making money. They're not paying their fair share. We all need to pay our fair share of taxes. You hear stories that, you have folks on SNAP benefits here in the US that don't really understand it. And again, I'm generalizing here. They don't understand economic principles. They don't know that money's coming from somewhere. It's being created. That's actually inflating the cost of their living, right? It makes it more expensive for them to live. So I think what happens when you have the central bank approach is you have these, I'll call it a fifth generation warfare. You can actually use this to weaponize a population against their own government. So I heard Elon Musk recently point out his experience with Doge, finding all the waste in the government. He recognized and realized that he can't fix that. There's nothing he can do. There's so much waste. And I think this is, again, it's an emergent property of printing money, if you will. So his view is, believe it or not, is to grow the economy. The only way out of the mess that we have in the government is to grow an economy through AI, which I believe he means that by, hey, there could be a potential for a universal basic income. Now we're getting into deeper socialism, if you will. But
Yeah,
we're at a turning point right now where we may not see the America that we started off with, like you pointed out. This may be the end.
yeah, you see, Punch. You see the criticism against Musk and various great businesses that they would like the government to be run on a principle of business, in other words, to become effective, efficient. This is a terrible thing because the more efficient the government, the more they're gonna encroach into our life, the more they're gonna take it in a more efficient way. Because a government role, and I'm not here, I'm in opposition a little bit with Mari Rosbach. I'm in favor of Ayn Rand, for instance, and Mises himself. They said that the role of the government is to provide the protection. That's what the American Constitution says: protect individuals against the government. In other words, you need the government as a big stick. If somebody violates your right, the government should protect you, right? Government should be able to protect you against external enemies and internal gangsters, right?
Right.
But that's about it. Government shouldn't be in business, shouldn't run anything,
But
shouldn't
yeah, here
control.
they're in our daily lives, right? It is go back to the point that Moose brought up, and that is complex, systems drive behavior. So the system creates a place for people to have power, and that's what some humans want. So that isn't going to go away anytime soon. And I think with the information age and the age of AI, maybe it is possible that we can get back to a more capitalistic society. But at the moment, the way things look here in the US, from my perspective, and this is my orientation, we're kind of at the end. I don't think there is a way out of the direction we're heading.
Yeah, you see, well, you can look at Trump, for instance, right? Supposedly a successful businesses, but he basically wants to be, he's a tyrant. He wants to control everything, right? He doesn't want free market. He only wants a market that will make him money, right? The moment he tries to run the government on the principle of making deals, it's a terrible thing. You don't do such a thing, right? You know, the best policy he could have done is dismantle the government completely, make it very small, and shut the central bank. That's what the Javier in Argentina had to do it, right? Milei, but Milei hasn't done it, right? He had the opportunity, still has, to close the central bank, because central bank is the greatest destroyer of the free market, greatest destroyer of the well-being of individuals. But people somehow believe we need the central bank, and that's the tragedy, right? So basically, the socialistic ideas, bad ideas, I call them bad. Maybe somebody else will tell me I'm talking nonsense. Are basically the enemy of the wealth creation and the free market. So capitalism requires absolute freedom, total freedom. That's what Ayn Rand says. And also Mises was saying total freedom. Also Rosbach says without being free, you
Yeah.
cannot think properly.
So Moose, I want to bring up a point here. When we go into the constructal law from physics, it's the same thing, right? We have to evolve towards more freedom.
Yeah.
That's the alignment here is physics. Natural science says the same thing. And I think that's the overlap in this, maybe the big connection between what Boyd brought us and what we've been looking at lately in the Mises Institute is it's a flow system, right? And a flow system should flow towards better design where currency, it could be information, money, blood, oil, whatever it may be, flows better through that system. And it's not socialism.
Remember that Boyd too. I
So
mean, he had a degree in economics, but he came of age in economics that might not have been a pure Austrian view, but it was certainly more probably trending that way than it is now, where government controls literally
Who is
everything.
this? Who is this guy?
So John Boyd is our
I'm not familiar with him.
No, well, now this is who I presented at the Austrian Economics Research Conference with Hunter Hastings, and basically what we were John Boyd was very interdisciplinary. Economics was one of his things that, one of his backgrounds, and certainly he was into freedom and a prioristic thinking. So there's a lot of synergy, and that's what our papers were trying to show: the synergy between Ludwig von Mises, Rothbard, Huerta de Soto, Hayek, and others, with Boyd's outlook that, as Ponch was saying, at the state of the universe, we're meant to be free and unhampered by external coercion to do things, whether it's engage in markets or raise a family or exchange with others or anything.
Absolutely.
And that's where a lot of the work that we do, as I think you would agree, Frank. I mean, when you read Human Action and you read, I think Rothbard's Man, Economy, and State is a little more accessible and readable than Mises. He's easier to read for the people that are listening that, don't, that want to
No, it's
maybe.
easy to read for the guys that been brought up on the mainstream economics, right?
Yeah, Rothbard's the place to start. I guess what I was saying is that, like, they're describing science. They're describing and discovering. They're not creating or imputing things that are mechanistic or Keynesian or socialistic or technocratic or whatever, because it allows for, as Mises says, right? I mean, all economic action is actually human action, and humans are organic and part of the part of the universe, and we're not designed to be operated on by outside forces that are far away from our homes and far away from our families and other things to weigh in on every single economic decision that we have to make.
Well, you see, since you raised this point, the great contribution of Mises that he basically introduced this what he called praxeology. In other words, he basically was saying that causality, cause and effect, according to Mises, the cause emanates from us, from our minds, right, from ourselves, not from outside factors. But the mainstream economists are usually other way around. They're saying there are outside factors which are driving us. In other words, they're presenting, they viewing an individual as a robot, as a machine, right, which is
Yeah.
driven by outside factors. And Mises says, no, 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 no. Causality comes from you. You decide whether you're setting the goals, and by setting goals, you could find out the means you require to achieve those goals. But in other words, the outside factors are important, but they're not the causes. The primary causes are coming from you. And that's very important because, like Mrs. was saying, you can introduce the most complicated mathematics in economics, the quantum mathematics, physics, whatever you want. It will not provide you with explanation of why things are happening, right, in the human world. In other words, Mises was saying mathematics can only describe things, but it cannot explain. And that's very important because praxeology, or what Mises did, and what actually Ayn Rand also, they're basically trying to explain why things are happening, right? Now,
S- s-
when they talk about inflation, just a simple example, they're all on TV. They describe which components gone up, how much food gone up, whatever, but they don't tell you the reason behind the inflation, right? So they tell you the reason are greedy businesses, right? They'll tell you profiteering, right? All sorts of nonsense, right? But nobody will say maybe it came from printing presses from the central bank itself, right? And that's really the cause for inflation. But in other words, the tendency of the mainstream and the non-Austrians are to describe things. They will describe the world in most complicated things using most complicated formulas, but they don't explain anything.
it was praxeology actually that hooked me. And Potch, I want to bring you in on this. This is actually what hooked me in my connection of drawing all this to Boyd, because when you read Human Action and you read the first part about where he's describing praxeology, in other words, the study of human action, he's describing OODA loop sketch. He's literally talking about OODA loop sketch, about how our orientation implicitly guides and controls and our sense making. Frank, isn't it like that Mises says something like, we envision and we feel and we understand of the uneasiness that we want to overcome within our minds or whatever. We imagine what that state is, so we make decisions and actions and learn and adapt to get to that state that we envision or we imagine.
Yeah, look, the whole idea of uneasiness, it's a philosophical. A lot of philosophers were disputing this, right? But how people take decisions, it's how the mind works. We can't really tell, right? Always saying that we decide. For instance, if my money income goes up, for instance, it doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to consume more, right? That's what the mainstream does. Like I have to consider various other things, my goals. Maybe my goals will change, all sorts of things, right? So that you, as a human being, make your own choices, right? But once you have chosen certain things, or you have a goal, a plan, you will need to find the logical means, right? This can be logically assessed, right? You know that in a desert, to quell your thirst, it won't help you to have a lot of gold, right? You need water, right? So in other words, you need to establish logical things, logically the means you require. But the goals will be set by you, right? Not by some computer, not AI or anything like that. So the whole thing is mainstream economics moved completely away from human beings. They describe robots, machines, a lot of unnecessary, crazy stuff, and this is also confuses people because economics is not. It shouldn't be seen as a complicated subject, but most people are having second thought about. Well, they don't understand economists as such, and rightly so, because economists are talking all sorts of nonsense. They don't talk about logically about things about life. So the Austrians, Mrs. Rosbach and Ayn Rand were talking about life. They were saying, you want to be alive, your ultimate goal is life preservation, to stay alive. And that's what Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian School of Economics, was saying. Life is the primary goal. And then all the other goals are subsidiary to the life.
So this parallels with what we talk about with organizations. We don't want to take an engineering approach to human systems, right? So that's what's happening in mainstream economics. There's a lot of engineering approaches, big brains trying to apply non-living approaches to that human system. That is fundamentally wrong in organizations, and this is again what we try to coach, and I think that's what John Boyd gave us is we have to look at the natural sciences, natural intelligence, to understand how living systems find creativity and thrive and survive. So fundamentally, I think Moose, that's why we're aligned on what Mises Institute puts out and what Boyd puts out and what the underlying science and emerging science tells us.
Yeah, Frank, we'd love to. I'm going to share it on the screen for those watching. We'd love to. So we are fans and recommenders of your Substack, and maybe close us out with telling us about your about AAS Economics, the Substack. I mean, the page is phenomenal, and for anybody that wants a good grounding in all of this stuff, you have excellent resources and tabs and things to learn. So maybe walk us through that a little bit, and we're going to be making sure that our subscribers are following up with this.
Look, I don't know what to say. I mean, all I'm saying, we're trying to convert or to convey, to make the Austrian economics more applicable. In other words, that people could relate in terms of their business decisions, in terms of thinking about issues which they call it economics, and we're trying to provide them with what we think the right tools to ascertain what's going on. For instance, again, if we go back to Nvidia, let's say yesterday, right? So the market was cheerful because Nvidia's sales profit were above expectations. But that's beside the point. Nobody said anything that maybe Nvidia some saying that they're bubble, Nvidia's bubble, but nobody says why it's a bubble. And we would actually articulate why it's a bubble and why the strong performance yesterday, that the results, that doesn't say that there won't be collapse. In fact, most of the collapses are happening when least expected. We're in the midst of the view that everything is great. We in the new period of wisdom. Everybody understands things, and the management is right, whatever. But that's precisely how the bust is catching people out of guards, and that's really what is happening. Nvidia or anybody, anything else, right? If it has to be part of the bubble because it couldn't be other way around. And just to give you just simple illustration, why it's a bubble. For instance, the money supply, the way we measuring year on year in August 2019 was minus 0.7%, or close to zero, let's say. By February 21, it jumped to almost 79% year on year. A massive increase, right? The people overlook all this, right? This
Yeah.
created, and because money supply affects activities with a time lag, it doesn't affect instantly. It could take many years until it filters through, right? So the massive bubble was created during this period between August and February 21, right?
That's COVID,
And
right?
Yeah, COVID.
COVID, right, was the greatest mismanagement on behalf of the government. People were forced to sit at home, and
Mm.
they were getting paid. Nobody was producing; everybody was consuming, right? So capital was eaten up, but the official statistics doesn't show it because the official statistics is all corrupt in terms of GDP and all those things, the way that they're presenting it. Well, you remember the case that the the Bureau of Labor Statistics, whatever, they came with the figures that Trump didn't like.
Mm.
He fired this person.
Well, I think the other thing, I think was one of the other things that I've learned, of course, through studying John Boyd, but also really Austrian economics, is sometimes it really does, it transcends political party lines. So if you really understand economics in the classic sense, in the way that you teach, Frank, I mean, it really does transcend political parties and political ideologies.
Yeah, look, most politician players in the market, you can call them political animals or not, whatever, but they all mainstream. They were brought up on great universities like Harvard, Yale, MIT. They all been brainwashed with polluted economics, wrong economics, right? Like to give you just background, Mises couldn't find a job in America, proper job. Such a great man. Rosbart, for many decades, was teaching in some kind of a unknown college in Brooklyn, right? Until somebody discovered that this guy is a genius and gave him a position in Las Vegas, right, university. So put it this way: great universities were shut, still closed for great Austrian thinkers because the dogma, the official dogma is that you have to, anything you write today in official academic journals in economics, you have to write heavy mathematics. So don't misunderstand me that most Austrians are very good at mathematics, like Rosbart had degree in maths also, right? Many of them, Mises was a mathematician, his brother was a mathematician, all were. Karl Menger was a mathematician, so they all knew what maths is all about, right?
Yeah.
But they realized that the methodology of natural sciences is not applicable to economics, to human beings. Mises came with this his statement that in economics we don't have, in human science we don't have constants because we only got variables. Things are changing all the time. Why? Because we got freedom of choice. We can change our mind.
Mm.
But in a mainstream economics, they follow the strict mathematics, So and they're very proud of their mathematics. But that's all That's got nothing to do with economics.
Yeah, it's disconnected. It's not always applicable to reality of the things that people are
No,
dealing with.
they got this so-called game theories, for instance, right? They're using or probabilities they're using, right?
Yeah.
Which got nothing to do. It's not applicable to economics, right?
I remember when I was getting my master's degree in economics, I had to have a discussion about George W. Bush's indifference curves versus
Yeah,
Oprah
this is another
Winfrey's
nonsense. This is
indifference
another.
curves.
Well, like indifference curves cannot be part of the choice because if either you choose one or two, but you can't be indifferent between those two, right? So this not it can't be part of the choice, the theory of choices. But anyhow, that's a subject for another discussion. But all I can say that the mainstream economics, as far as Mises and Rothbard were concerned, is completely wrong,
Mm.
misleading. I mean, it describes something which doesn't.
I mean, there are, I was in the asset management world on Wall Street for over 15 years. I met I could count on two hands the number of Austrian economists that I met in all those years. And I remember, giving people a paper on the yield curve that an Austrian had written, or telling somebody to read Human Action, or the one book that the Mises Institute, the collection of the trade cycle essays with Mises
Yeah,
and Gottfried Haberler and other,
yeah, yeah,
and you
yeah.
would hand it to them, and it was like you handed them like something that was written in Klingon. They're like, I never learned this at Harvard. I never learned this at Wharton. I never learned this in my
Therefore, it must
CFA.
be wrong. Therefore, it's wrong.
Yeah, well, but then it's interesting to note too that a lot of people that they never really preached Austrian economics, but they certainly inherently understood it. Like a Warren Buffett, for example. I mean, he understood that value is subjective, and he understood how real economics works, even though he didn't talk that he did.
Yeah.
And I think that there are some pretty astute managers out there that do get it and do look at it, because and this is what we would recommend to our subscribers and our listeners is like, get a differentiated view and use the Austrians as a start. So start with maybe, Frank, after this I'll ask you to rattle off some books to start for people. But if that differentiated lens, you're never going to look at the Wall Street Journal or CNBC or the news media. You'll never look at it the same way again. You'll always be able to see the gaps and the mismatches that otherwise are going to get you're going to get bulldozed, and you're not going to see those.
Well, Mark, like for me, one of the greatest writers in economics was Henry Hazlitt.
Henry
Uh,
Hazlitt, yeah.
yeah, economics.
Economics in one lesson.
That's so. If a person can grasp what Henry Hazlitt said, that's enough. He will be
Henry Hazlitt was one of the people that fought to get Mises a job here in
exactly,
Manhattan at NYU.
exactly.
So Henry Hazlitt's interesting that you mentioned him, because there's an example of how these ideas at one point were pretty common, because Henry Hazlitt had a column, I think, in Newsweek. I mean, he was a well-known writer, and his book Economics in One Lesson basically takes it's Say's law, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The broken window fallacy.
But what's nice about the Henry Hazlitt, he uses simple common sense basically,
Yeah.
and that's it. And because his principle was 1 + 1 = 2. If you're getting 2.5, you must be doing something wrong.
Hmm.
That's. So it's like, again, Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand says at the moment you have logical error, whatever, you have to stop and check your assumptions. Check your reasoning. That's all. And so Ayn Rand she was great, in terms of thinking, in terms of methodology, and epistemology. That's really what's needed.
So one of her inner circle wrote a great paper on gold and freedom, and his name was Alan Greenspan. Where did he go wrong?
Well, he wanted to become him. Took he took advantage of idiots, and he wanted to become an important person. That's
I
one of the.
remember when he would testify before Congress, and Ron Paul would start quoting him because he had written all this when he was part of Ayn Rand. I forget what she called it. Like, she had the name for her
Ayn Rand
circle.
circle.
Yeah, and he Ron Paul would start quoting Greenspan about what he had written about gold and freedom and money connected to a gold standard, in his
Yeah,
use
yeah,
his own words against them.
yeah. Look, I mean, those people look. I can I'm not basically supporting Greenspan for what he did, but he basically wanted to succeed something, but which is wrong the way he did it. But the whole environment until now in America, I think, is getting worse because people are more and more attracted, the young generation, towards socialism.
Yeah.
This is really sad. I mean, a person like Bernie Sanders became so influential, like Alexandra or Cortez, whatever her name. It's terrible. I mean, but even Trump himself, I mean, this is nobody among the politicians trying to push for free market, for
Mm,
wealth creation.
yeah.
That's the sad stuff. None of them even knows the meaning of wealth. That's the problem.
Well, I think the other thing that's interesting about the Austrians is that they actually do have a theory of capital.
Well, some of the Austrians, but to me, the only guy who articulated properly this whole theory of capital or the capital story was, of course, von Baver, Menger, Mises, and Rosbaud. That's it. I'm not a fond of Hayek. I'm sure Hayek was a great man, but Hayek had the tendency to compromise. He wanted to breach the mainstream with as Austrian economics, in a subtle way.
Yeah, I
That's
mean,
why.
we write a lot about Hayek. There's a lot of synergy with Hayek, but I certainly understand your sentiment on that there is some times where he's kind of an errant on his like also like Joseph Schumpeter, for example. Like there's a lot of things that Joseph Schumpeter was brought up in that, or like Oscar Morgenstern, they were brought up in the classical, but then they went in a different direction that kind of they end up debunking themselves.
Well, like for instance, you also find among the free marketeers, the biggest disaster is the Chicago School.
Yeah, like Milton
Friedman
Friedman and
is
others. Yeah,
considered as a free marketeer. Is basically wants to created rules for the central bank to exist. He didn't say
yeah.
close the central bank or whatever. He was a smart guy. Did a lot of interesting stuff, but Mises made a pronouncement about him that he is very dangerous for the free market.
I remember hearing somebody was saying that nobody could give a defense of the free market orally better than Milton Friedman, but at the same time, he was an orthodox Keynesian.
Absolutely. I mean, he basically, when he talks about money supply, all the time was talking about money supply, money drives the activity. He basically perverted the whole theory there. The whole
Yeah.
thing is incorrect as far as Austrians are concerned. But he basically his theory was a black box theory. He never has like Austrians had a proper theory. No, when
Yeah.
I say Austrians, I mean Misesian and Rosbaudian.
No, I mean, I hope you can accept the flattery, but you would be, in my opinion, one of the deans of Austrian economists of
I'm not
today.
really
Well, well, we'll still pump you up a little bit, but like, who are some of the other, like, I guess I think of Jesus Huerta de Soto in Spain is putting
Yeah,
out. He's done a lot
Jesus
on
de
this.
Soto. Jesus
Yeah,
de Soto. Yeah, he's a interesting guy. I mean, look, most people, when there is certain level, their ego is running out ahead of them, right? And that's the problem, right?
yeah.
So that Mises wasn't like that. Was quite humble guy. Rosbach was humble. I don't say it's good or bad, but like they were quite forceful in terms of ideas. They're like once they reached the conclusion that 1+1 equals 2, you couldn't really move them and tell them it's 2.5, right?
Hmm.
But those other guys, they're quite flexible. For instance, there's a tendency to follow the data also among the Austrians. Like some of them will wrote articles, and I don't want to say the names, that the time preference could be negative. In other words, interest rates, if you have negative interest rates, it's logically correct, right? Which we had negative interest rate. But
Mm,
but if you follow theoretically, you know that you cannot have negative. The only way you can have negative interest rate if the central bank tampers with the financial market.
mm,
So so first of all, you have to have a theory which is like a map, a guide to you to what's right, what's wrong, and then you can start to analyze why things are happening despite the theory says something else. If the map says that tells you that in order to reach the point B, you have to, from A to B, you have to go a certain way. That's fine. That's really what you have to do, right? But
Mm.
if you decided to go a different route without consulting the map, you have a problem. And that's what theory is. Theory is just a map. It tells you what's right or what's wrong. And that's why it has to be logically scrutinized. And once you logically have scrutinized all that and you're satisfied, then you can continue to analyze the data. But what you have today, data is published. People are just talking about they're discussing the data without any framework of thought. They'll tell you, the GDP gone up, or it's great for the economy. Why it's great? Maybe it's bad.
Yeah. If you torture the data, it'll confess to anything.
That's right. But the point is that they rely on correlations, of course. But the point is that data doesn't talk. And that's why you need to have a epistemology. And the Mises has shown that you cannot get any idea from the data by looking at the data. You have to have a theory beforehand. That's what a priori means.
We're gonna send. I mean, because boom and bust is something that we talk a lot about, and everybody knows the Great Depression of these. And Rothbard wrote that book, America's Great Depression, has one of the best description of the boom bust cycle I think that are available. Everybody forgets the Great Depression. What is it, of 1920 or 1921? Nobody even knows it because the government didn't.
1930s.
Well, no, the one before that, after the First World War,
Yeah.
where the government didn't do anything, and it was over like really fast, and it was over organically from people, entrepreneurs, people doing their own thing. I forget the year. I want to say it was like 20 or 21.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, if I recall. Yeah, you're probably right.
And then then like with the gold window still being closed, and that still has a pretty profound effect on price signals.
Sure.
Well, Frank, we want to thank you for taking the time and staying up with us from across the sea. And we're going to send everybody to AAS Economics because, again, on Substack, there's very few that not only give you a grounding in authentic Austrian economics, but also to show application, how you can actually start looking at markets. And you guys do a really good job of giving us a view into markets through an Austrian lens that I think is extremely helpful. So thank you very much for taking the
Yes.
time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.